All right. Good evening, everyone. How you doing? All right. My name is Dr. Belcher. I'm the superintendent of Cleveland School District. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and all the board members that showed up tonight. All of our external evaluators that we have invited to explain some stuff better than what we can explain. So we began this process around early of this year pertaining to our facilities. So what's going to happen is they're going to explain to you the results or summary of the facility study that we had done, that the board requested, because our main thing was we're trying to see if we can move all of our secondary to one campus. So with that being said, we found a lot of situations and a lot of things that came from the study that we need to fix or discuss. Tonight is all about giving you the facts. We're just trying to give you the facts and give you more information so that if something does go forward, you can make a better decision. I'm a true believer, the more information you have, the better decisions you can make. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Mr. Gary Bailey.
How does this work? Won't you put it on? Okay, good evening. My name is Gary Bailey, and I'm one of the owners of Bailey Program Management. A short little piece of information about who I am and why I'm here. I happen to be trained as an architect, but that's not really my total expertise. I also own an educational consulting company because my primary focus is on education and the blending of how buildings and education work together, because they have a direct correlation. Those of you that are teachers know that it makes a big difference in how you teach and the atmosphere in which kids learn. So I've kind of focused my career on looking at facilities directly related to educational facilities. And this study is a response to that. I've done probably 90 separate facility studies throughout the district, throughout the state, and have designed well over 60% of the new schools in the state of Mississippi. So to say I know school buildings would be an understatement. I do know school buildings. I know them very well. But more importantly, I choose to listen to educators and to community members. And that's why this meeting exists tonight, is to share information. We're going to share the data of what we found in our study. The board has seen this data. No actions have been taken. No votes have been taken. They said, let's let the community have a chance for input. And that's why we're here. So I'm going to go through a summary of the study and show you what we found. Jim Young is here. Jim is a bond lawyer who will talk about financing and what does it take to fund any kind of capital improvements for facilities. And one of the things I will say about that, kind of as a preface to the meeting, is that there's not a school district in the state of Mississippi that has enough money to do what they want to do. There's not one that has enough money to do what they need to do, because we're so far behind in our state economically in dealing with facilities, and our tax base is so low that you can only do what you can do. And there's legal limits that Jim will talk about capacity that the district has to fund capital improvements of facilities. And what ends up happening is that we try to recommend a long-range planning process that you look at what are your goals, what is your vision, where do you want to be as a school district, most importantly, educationally, and how your buildings respond to that, and how do we prioritize the expenditure of money to get the most impact educationally. And those are tough decisions. Those are hard things to do because they involve choices. And our focus is what's in the best interest of children, and I think that's what the board has asked us to do, is to give them options and give them information about where are your facilities from a situational point of view, and how do we get to a goal of improving them. Our staff has been to every one of your buildings. We've gone through them A to Z, and we use a very detailed matrix to evaluate the buildings, from roofs to windows to doors to walls and floors and everything you can imagine. We also look at capacity of the building, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit here in a minute, of what has your enrollment done, because you, like many districts in the Delta, have had a declining enrollment. How does that impact your facilities? How does it impact your district? And we look at capacity of your buildings. How many kids can they hold in a normal situation? And how does that impact efficiency? Because dollars drive education, We want to make sure you get the most money in the operation of your buildings and spend the least on facilities that you can to get the most academically. And that's an efficiency issue. So we want to make sure you're getting the most efficiency out of the buildings that you have and to do it economically to get the most impact for kids. So that's a little bit of overview. I'm going to show you a lot of numbers, and believe me, you will not be crazy if you glaze over. So just don't hesitate. I'll go through them fairly quickly, and then we'll have some question and answer time, and Jim will talk about money. I'm going to stand on this side over here and let Dr. Belcher advance a little bit, hopefully. Okay, a little bit about your demographics and your capacity issues. As I mentioned, I only know of 3 school districts in the state of Mississippi that are growing right now. And DeSoto County, maybe Lamar County, and possibly Gulfport. Every other district is doing good to maintain where they are. You are not maintaining where you are. In the last 5 years, you have lost 10% of your enrollment. And those are real numbers because they're real kids, and they impact your funding. As you know, the state funding formula is based on ADA. So if you got 10% less kids, your state funds are being reduced, not necessarily by 10%, but pretty close to it. So it puts more of a burden on you to be efficient and to get the most out of your dollars that you have. From a capacity point of view, all of your elementary schools have room as they exist right now. You can add more kids to them if you chose to do it. Your middle school and high school do not. They are both full. The high school is actually more full than the middle school, but they do not have any capacity to add additional kids to either of the campuses as they stand right now. And the elementary schools that I talked about range anywhere from having capacity for 2 or 3 more classes to having a capacity for 10 more classes. So what that tells me is that you've got some overcapacity and you need to be more efficient with it because every tax dollar is important. Okay. Give you a summary of what we found throughout the district, and I could talk about any specific school and will about some of them. But one we found of the needs is that you need to be more efficient because of your overcapacity. You need to use them efficiently. We're recommending that your elementary schools be a continuous grade structure except the 2 magnet schools. And let me stop there and talk about what that means because it'll show up several times in the presentation. Is right now you have zones for your elementary schools and you've got your 2 magnet schools. And the zones work fine. There's nobody saying that they're necessarily bad. But in the best interest of education, other than the magnet schools, it would make more sense academically if every student in the district went to every school, every elementary school. So therefore, there's no haves and have-nots. There's nobody arguing about one got this amount of money and the other got another. It also helps with accountability is that everybody's pulling from the same train. So you're working more together, and if kids do not succeed in one grade, that impacts the next grade. So therefore, they all want each other to succeed. So that'll be one of our recommendations. Several of your elementary schools were, try not to be negative, were done in a way that was not most efficient for education, meaning the walls did not go all the way to the ceiling. And somebody thought that was brilliant when it was done. I hope none of y'all are in this room that gets credit for that. But it's been very tough educationally over the years for teachers to teach and kids to learn in an environment where noise is transferring over the walls. So we will clearly recommend that that be fixed in every school in which it exists. And that involves lowering ceilings, it involves extending walls, creating sound isolation bats above them so that you have classrooms that are more conducive to learning. Security is a hot button in any school in America today. And everybody reads the news, sees the news, and hears of all the horror stories, and they exist, and they're real. And it's changed the way educators have to think about how we manage our school facilities. For example, in a perfect elementary school or any school, you would have one central controlled entry that is a secure entry, that when school starts, every visitor that goes to that school walks through this secure entry. the administrators acknowledge who this person is and decide whether to let them in the building or not. So that's a most important security thing you can do. The other is to make sure you have electronic hardware on all of your perimeter doors, so that after school has started, if this door is not propped open, if it was closed like it should be on a normal school day, and it opens, an administrator in the office is going to know which door opened and can have that checked. Because the best thing that we can do is keep the perimeter of our buildings locked so that visitors come into one point. Now, many of you are going to ask on this campus here, how do you do that with all these multiple buildings? Well, you have to change how you operate those buildings. You have to change how you organize them and create them in a safe and secure manner. Some of that will be with aesthetically pleasing fencing. Some of it will be with expansions that allow the buildings to be one building. So a campus plan might sound good and feel good, but it's not very safe and secure. So the more we can bring our buildings in a contiguous manner, the better off we'll be from a safety point of view. So security always has to be very important. You've got several of your campuses that have major roofing needs. You've got some that have minor roofing needs, and every leak is a real leak, and if a leak's falling on your child, it's a major leak. So every roof needs to not leak. That's an obvious thing. If they're under warranty, they need to be taken care of by the manufacturer, but several of yours are out of warranty, and you've got to take care of those as your first priority. Electrical, mechanical, and site. The needs vary dramatically throughout the district. You've got some that have intercom issues. You've got a couple of buildings that have electrical load issues where air conditioning and computers have been added over the years, but the capacity of the building has not been improved necessarily. Those are relatively easy things to fix. Your mechanical or your heating and cooling is a much bigger issue. And to be honest, you do not have enough money to fix all of your heating and cooling needs in the district. You would spend $7 to $8 million doing every mechanical system that needs to be fixed, and you just don't have that kind of capacity to do that. So what we're recommending is a phased-in approach, that you take your worst units, replace them as a part of your funding, and then every year put money aside to deal with those on an annual basis, or every 3 to 4 years do another mechanical replacement. So again, it's part of your long-range plan. You've got a couple of sites that have serious site needs. The asphalt's falling apart, the drainage is not working, and you've got some sewer pipes that are old and worn out that need to be replaced. So those are some critical things that need to be dealt with. We agree that as an educational consultant and a planner, that your middle school and high school need to be on the same campus. And I'm sure there's always different views on that, and we respect every one of them. And I could probably argue either of those views. But from an academic point of view, with the number of students that you have in a decreasing enrollment, it is more efficient use of resources to put 7 through 12 on one campus. And we think this current campus is the only campus that has the capacity to do that, as you'll see in our recommendations in a minute. The elementary schools need to be looked at differently of how we organize them and get the most use out of them as well, which I'll talk about very quickly. Okay, next. This is one I won't spend a lot of time on because I know you can't read it and y'all are all wondering what the heck is he talking about up here. But I wanted to show you the process that we used in the study. And on the left are each of your schools, and at the top are 4 different organizational options of how you might organize your school district. And underneath that are dollars that it takes to fix each of those schools in each one of those organizational systems. For example, Naylor Elementary under option 1, and option 1 is if you keep everything just like it is. You don't change anything organizationally, you go fix the buildings that you have. And if you did that and did it properly, you would spend a little over $240,000 at Naylor because it had some work done to it. So its needs are not near as great. But you look at DM Smith under option 1, it's $6.2 million to do everything that needs to be done to that campus. And you keep going down the line, if you change nothing, you would spend over almost $43 million just fixing what you've got in a situation where you have not good efficiency of utilization of the buildings. So we do not think that's a wise expenditure of money. Now, one of the things that some of you are going to have a question about, and I've read all of your history of this district. I know everything that's gone on with the Justice Department, and even people back when all of that was going on said, why don't we build a new high school in this community? Why don't we start from scratch? Well, the reason you don't is option number 2, because it costs $46 million to build a new high school, just 9 through 12. And it costs $14 million to start from scratch on athletic facilities. So you could be spending $60 million to get a new high school and still have not fixed not one item at your other existing buildings. I ran this study to say that it is a viable option. It's a wonderful option if you could afford it. I'll tell you now, you cannot afford it. There's no way on God's earth, unless somebody writes you a benevolent check, that could happen. So the total needs in the district are $84 million if you did a new high school. So thus comes option 3 and option 4. And option 3 is what we're referring to as the long-range plan, is that if you had adequate funding and you could afford $59 million, this would be the ultimate way of organizing your district. And let me walk you through that, because option 4 is a prioritized basis of how do you get there in a way that you could afford to do. In option 4, we would be taking the Naylor campus and making it the central office for the district. It would put all of central office functions in one building. You would spend very little money to do that, and it would make your elementaries much more efficient, and you'll see what we propose for that existing administrative area. In option 3, the elementary schools are contiguous, like I talked about earlier. So for example, the 2 magnet schools stay as they are. Pearman becomes a pre-K and K. Parks becomes a first and second grade. D.M. Smith becomes 3 and 4. And the existing middle school becomes a 5th and 6th grade elementary school, so that every student goes to each of those elementary schools, with the exception of the 2 magnet schools that stay as they are organizationally. If you continue on down at the existing Cleveland High campus, if you did all of the renovations that needs to be done, it's $12 million. And if you continue to do the additions that I'm fixing to talk about to put 7 through 12 on that campus, that would be up to another $24 million. The athletics need to be improved as well. I'll talk in detail about what we're recommending for your athletic facilities here, but that's $5.5 million. So that's roughly a $59 million long-range plan. And the purpose of a long-range plan is to know where you're going, and you incrementally implement that as much as you can afford to do. And thus becomes option 4, which would do the same functions, but we would reduce the scope of work in a prioritized basis. And the things that I talked about earlier of the summary of needs, that's what's in option 4, and I'll talk about it again in a second. So the renovations under the existing Central High School would be 3.7, and the additions would be $16.9 million. The athletics would be 5.8. So you would be spending substantial money on this 7 through 12 campus to make it not adequate, to make it not just normal, but to make it extraordinary. And I want to stress that your kids deserve the best as much as any other kid in the state. That's just a core belief that I have, and I believe you have the opportunity of achieving that. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to have inconveniences? Yes. But can it be wonderful? It can. And I've gone in and done surveys of schools in which we've gone and made some of those improvements, and it does make a difference in atmosphere of how kids learn. It makes a difference in them wanting to be at school, which is the first step that a teacher needs to be able to teach kids effectively if they want to be there. And it gives teachers an environment to teach as a professional, which they should be treated. So that ends up being a $33 million price tag of the priorities of a long-range plan. And if you implement the funding that Jim's fixing to talk to you about in a minute, you could achieve that list of priorities. And can it be adjusted? Sure. The board may choose to do some of these and not do some of the others. There's a preliminary list right now, but it's what we've called the prioritized needs. Okay, boss. All right, summary of that option. You're keeping the magnet schools organizationally as they are, and you're fixing their priority needs. You're reorganizing your elementaries so that every child goes to each school, and you renovate them. You fix those walls, fix those ceilings, re-roof where you need to. You repurpose Naylor Elementary as a central office, and the existing middle school becomes an elementary for upper elementary kids 5 through 6. Central High School has a major addition that I'm fixing to talk about, and you renovate the existing buildings for 7 through 12. That's electrical, mechanical. It's re-roofing many of the buildings. It's definitely doing work to toilet renovations, which we would be doing in many of your other buildings. It's painting, it's doing site work and security. It's fixing the most critical needs within the existing building. Okay, next. The additions that we're proposing will obviously require classrooms and science labs to accommodate grades 7 and 8. As I mentioned, 9 through 12 is already full here. So you would have to do substantial additions to the front of what used to be the middle school here. And what that does is gives you the opportunity to change the image of this campus from the highway. It puts a new front door on your school, a new central administrative office that's just for 7 through 12 students that becomes the visitor entry point and a control point. It builds a new cafeteria that's a cafetorium, but it's also a commons area that helps unify these buildings. As y'all know well, there's a road right in here between the buildings. We would close that, and that's where the cafeteria and kitchen would be built, as well as a new media center. So this zone here would be the linkage that ties the buildings together, but it also requires your separation. Existing 7th and 8th graders would stay in the old high school building. 9 through 12 would be zoned in the old middle school and new addition. And the only times they see each other is when they get to school in the morning and when they leave. They would eat at different times. They go to the library at different times. Their academics are all at different times. But one of the things it does educationally, and it goes back to the 7 through 12 concept, is that you've got 8th graders that are learning at a higher level need to be taking higher level courses, and they could still do that. You may have a teacher that needs to teach both 8th graders and 9th graders. Well, that teacher could do that in a 7 through 12 campus. So that's where some of those efficiencies come from. You may have a 9th grader that has problems in math or whatever and needs to be taking a remedial class. So because they're contiguous, they could do that. The other things that would take place is additions to all of your fine arts. Band, chorus, drama would have major additions to them as well as renovations. So that's expanding each of those programs. And a major renovation of your gymnasium to add bleachers so that you can separate visitors and home, and renovate all of the locker rooms and toilets in that building, as well as the painting and heating and cooling and the other needs that take place. Okay. Athletics. You've got a great start of athletic facilities. You've got a stadium for football, you've got a stadium for baseball, and you've got a stadium for softball. Neither of them are what I would consider first class. And what we would recommend that you do is improve all of them by adding artificial turf to the football field and a competitive track, to put in new lights and a Jumbotron scoreboard, to do renovations to your bleachers, renovate baseball and softball, which is primarily lighting with new LED lights, and to take your existing administration building and make it a field house for athletics. Size-wise, it is adequate. You would gut out all the sheetrock walls, and you'd be able to have a proper field house and a convenient location for your athletic programs. That can be done. We're currently working in Vicksburg Warren Central, where we've taken both of their high school athletic campuses and done major changes to them. And if you've been to their campuses, it's a radical change. Their buildings are also going to go through the same transformation that we're talking about here. Okay. Short summary of cost of option 4 is to renovate the elementaries is $5.8 million. To renovate and do additions to Central High School is $21.5 million. To do the athletic improvements is $5.8 million, or a total of $33 million. And that's a lot of money. And the way Jim and I have done a lot of these dog and pony shows, but the short version of how you go about doing this is you've been in the past been improving your buildings out of your operating budget. You're spending money that the district brings in every year on taxes to fix buildings that are outdated. That's taking money out of education and putting it into buildings. To do this properly, you would need to pass a bond issue which would fund most of these improvements and a small amount of lease purchase funding that Jim will explain to get to that $33 million number. Bond issues are an election that requires 60% of the people who vote to vote in favor of it. That is a political election, voting on things that are not political. But it takes people to be supportive of this school system and your kids to make it happen, and it takes 60% of those who vote to do it. It's not an easy thing to do, it's a difficult thing to do. And every community faces those challenges of what are you going to do with your buildings? Are you going to continue to put Band-Aids on them, or are you going to start improving them for better atmosphere for students? Next. I wanted to show you a couple of images here of what other districts have done, not to tell you that they're great and you're not, but just to show you what potentials can be and what other kids and other communities are getting. Upper left is Clinton, middle top is DeSoto County. We built 6 new high schools at the same time in DeSoto County. Lower right is Germantown. The lower left ones are Madison County schools. Next. Upper left is Gulfport High School, and I want to talk about it for a second because it's a much bigger high school than yours, but it's a very similar issue. They had some buildings that needed to be kept, but many of their buildings were torn down. Now, you can't afford to tear yours down, but that enabled them to create a secure campus, and they went from having 58 exterior doors and entries to their campus to 3, and they have administrative offices at all 3 of those entries. So you walk in today and there's an environment in a courtyard that's designed for students, much like we would recommend for the interior of this commons area for media center and cafeteria. The other buildings, second from the right on the upper is Canton Schools, where they had an existing old high school that was just terrible image-wise. We added new media center administrative functions along the front to change the image. Upper right and lower left, upper right is Tupelo High School, and then lower left is Tishomingo High School. And then the stadium, I don't know which stadium that is, to be honest. But we've done several, and they're not that complex to do. It just requires the effort. Okay, boss. All right, financial. Jim's going to give you an overview of that, and then I'll close it out and we'll answer some questions.
Well, good evening, and it's nice to be here to visit with you. I'm Jim Young. It's been my pleasure to work with this district for many years. We've been working with school districts on finance matters for over 30 years, and I want to echo several of the things that Gary said. First of all, there's no district in this state. I think that's pretty safe to say no district in this state can afford all that it wants to do, or most of them what they need to do. And so I analogize it, and Gary made a couple of points. You know, the first thing you want to do is come up with a long-term view so that you kind of have your vision of what needs to be done. And then it becomes a matter of prioritizing what can we afford to do. And I view what I do as sort of like putting together a puzzle. That when you put together a puzzle, the first thing you do is look at the picture on the box and say, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And then we put the puzzle pieces on the table, and then we start looking at, okay, how do we fit these together to accomplish our goal? And what really every district has to do is come up with that priority list, and then come up with a strategy for how are you going to fund things over time. And so you have to look at, well, what debt do we have on the books now? You know, what's available to us? of the debt that we have, when is that paying off? And so how do we fit those puzzle pieces together to accomplish our goal, not only for today's purposes, but with a view toward building toward the future? And the last thing we want to do is something today that is going to limit us needlessly from doing things that we need to do in the future. So I'll start with school districts can borrow money only as allowed by law. And there are about 4 or 5 statutes that allow districts to borrow for facilities. You can do a bond issue, you can do a capital lease, you can do a 3-mil note. Those are the 3 primary ways of funding. Each way, each method has its own statutory rules that have to be followed. Each method has limitations on how much a district can borrow. And then it has the procedure of how do you borrow that money and for what purposes can you use the proceeds. The way of borrowing significant amounts is through a bond issue, as Gary mentioned. And in fact, for a project of this size, he's right that the district will have to pass a bond issue to make this work. Now, districts are normally limited to being able to borrow no more than 15% of their assessed valuation. There are a few exceptions to that rule that would allow the district to borrow a little bit more. We'll be looking at those exceptions to see if any of them apply. But for right now, I think it's a safe assumption to assume that the district can issue bonds in an amount equal to 15% of the assessed value of the district. That's basically 15% of the value, the taxable value of property within the district. As Gary mentioned, it takes a special election to approve the bond issue. It takes 60%, approval of 60% of those voting in the election to approve the bond issue. The bonds are repaid out of a special ad valorem tax. And I really like the way Gary kind of phrased it at the very end, that this is a way of shifting some things that have been being paid out of operating funds, shifting those to be paid out of non-operating funds. Now, based on an assumed value of what 1 mil produces, and taxes are levied in increments called mils. It's basically 1/1000th of a percent. Nobody really knows what that is, so we're going to convert that to dollars. We're estimating, and we used a high interest rate. If we sold the bonds now, the actual interest rate would be lower than what we use to run some of these projections. So take all of this as being very preliminary, very rough, maybe it's not the right word, but it will be refined as we go along. And who knows what interest rates will be doing, when the election passes and the bonds are actually issued. There are other things that we would look at. Do you issue all the bonds at one time? Do you break them up and issue them in 2 series over 2 different tax years? So again, I just want to emphasize this is all very preliminary and very much subject to change. But based on all of those assumptions and using what's a high interest rate for right now, we're estimating that for a taxpayer with a $100,000 house and a $15,000 car, the tax impact would be $14.14 per month. We'll refine that as we go, but I think that's a very good starting point for estimations. So if our debt limit is $30.9 million, and the project numbers that we're looking at now are around $33 million, that's going to leave anywhere from $2 to $4 million, a gap of $2 to $4 million that we need to come up with additional funding to get to the full amount of the project. There are various ways of doing that. First of all, as Gary mentioned, the district can do what's called a capital lease. That's the second way that schools can borrow money for capital improvements. And you see we've run different scenarios of anywhere from $2 to $4 million, what the district could borrow and the annual cost to repay that. We may actually not get to the capital lease because there are ways of selling the bonds that generate what's called a premium, where the district actually gets more proceeds than the face amount of the bonds. And we're estimating that it could be possible. Again, it's extremely early, but the bonds could be sold at a premium of anywhere from $2 to $4 million. So that alone potentially could bridge the gap between the amount of the bond issue and what we need for the project. We'd also look at taking perhaps a little bit of fund balance. The district has been good stewards of its funding, and it may be possible that some small portion could be paid out of the district's fund balance. The third method of borrowing money I mentioned was the 3-mil notes, limited tax notes. The district, Gary mentioned that the district had, for a number of years, paid for things out of fund balance and done a good job of keeping things afloat that way, but they've also been very effective in how they have used the 3-mil note borrowing authority to cover a lot of capital expenses. Since they already have several notes outstanding, while the district could do a small note right now, we think it would be better to wait a few more years when the district could borrow more money through a 3-mil note. That gets back to Gary's comment about let's figure out what can we pay for today, let's prioritize, but we're still looking at the future to see several years down the road, what options might there be to finish out these priorities. That's it, Gary.
Flip to the last slide. Be very short. Just stand near me.
Okay.
Well, let me get out of the way for it too. A couple of things in closing, and then we'll take questions. You have choices as a community, and these are public schools, and you're the public. So you can do nothing, and you can keep what you've got, and you'll get what you've got. And you'll be using operating budget in which to do it. Or you could focus on improving education and the environment in which kids learn, and create a better environment for learning, better efficiency, and investing in education. I will stress that equity is a very important issue to us, is that every school and every child deserves the same level of quality, and that's just a very, very important thing. It requires a bond issue in which to get those goals done. All right, that's as short a summary as I can make it. I'll be glad to answer any questions or let Jim or Dr. Belcher answer any of that needs to be taken care of. Yes, sir.
How long do y'all see this process taking?
It's a very good question, is that if you passed a bond issue, let's say February, for example, it's typically a little over a 2-year process to get it designed and constructed. And some of that has to be done in a phased manner. And that's one of the things Jim was talking about. You may not sell all the bonds at one time, so that you'll reduce the impact on taxes over 2 years than just one because of the expenditure of money. Some of the smaller projects could be done in a year, but the bigger project would take 1.5 years of construction and half a year for design.
When you were talking,
thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Do y'all see the new addition being in that grassy area outside of the old middle school?
Yes.
Where the new addition would be?
That's the primary area.
And then second question, do y'all work in, so you talked about the elementary schools, right? So a kid would basically be in every elementary school for 2 years. What's the impact to the child?
That's a great question. How do you impact learning when you've got renovations going on? And that's one of the reasons you take an extended time period. As you know, summers are very limited from what they used to be. So some of the most dirty work, if you will, takes place during summers, but the other work has to take place after hours. Contractors are used to doing that. There's some work that can be done at night, others that can't be done at night. If we can zone parts of the building where we could shut down 4 classrooms at a time, as I mentioned, you have capacity in your elementary schools to do that. You could allow a contractor in there, finish those 4 classrooms and move to the next one. Safety's got to be the most important thing. You've got to protect kids and the adults who work there, and contractors are used to doing that.
I'm sorry, I meant more like, what's the
I'm sorry, I missed your
Yeah,
question.
every time a child moves schools, you know, there's a learning loss.
No, and that's a valid question. Now, you know, change is an issue in any educational environment. And one of the things that we thought about in talking with your administration is that those kids are staying together. So they're a cohort that stays from kindergarten, you know, all the way up till the 12th grade. So that's part of the importance of doing that. You're changing the environment, and one of the things that it requires is the administration to work with the principals, that they have to be contiguous. They have to talk together. They have to work together. That starts at the top, and I think your superintendent's got great vision for how you achieve great education, and it's a leadership issue.
Thank you.
Very back.
Question I want to ask, is this facility over here older than the facility that Cleveland Middle School is?
They're very similar ages, and really very similar conditions. Right here, lady right here.
You mentioned on one slide, very briefly, the Career Technical Education
Yes.
Center. What are your plans for the VOTEC, if any?
Yeah, there are some renovations that have to be done, some electrical needs, some roofing needs. There's several things there that we've met with administration on. It's not major, it's minor.
So
It is in the plan, yes, ma'am.
A couple questions. What is maximum bond capacity?
We just looked at it.
Okay, so that means we have assessed the total value of all our property and came up with 15%.
The 15% is the maximum you can do by law, and that gives you the 30.9, I think.
30.9.
30.9 million.
That's
Yes,
the
ma'am.
most you could get by law.
What was the assessed value of all our property?
I don't have the,
Who had it? Who, I mean,
oh, it comes from the county.
do you have an idea what it is?
We have it.
Mathematically, it's reverse math there. Somebody that's smarter than me
Yeah,
could figure that out.
What's the total value assessed of this property? Total assessed value? Yeah, they basically,
You actually got it up there, it's 187 million, because 1 mil generates 187,000.
That's a good, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Save me from myself.
187 million assessed value for the
now, let me ask you this. The pictures that you show of the new schools, were they new schools or were they renovated schools?
Some of those were new and some of them were additions and renovations
Okay, the 6 schools in Madison County, you built 6 new schools in Madison
in
County.
DeSoto County.
No, you said
I said we did some additions at Madison County. The 6 new schools were in DeSoto.
6 new schools were in DeSoto County.
Yes, sir.
What was the average cost of these schools?
At that time, they were about 22 to 30 million dollars. And of course, that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and
Okay,
costs have almost doubled since then.
What was the average student population? You probably know that.
In DeSoto County, they range anywhere from 1,200 to 1,700 students per high school.
So we wouldn't need that size school.
No. But we ran those numbers of what it would take to accomplish your educational program, and that's where the $46 million came from.
And I understand there's a maximum loan that we go, bond with capacity we can do. But I said in the previous meeting, and I said in this meeting, I think it's very important that we entertain building a new school, regardless of the cost. Let's make it happen. I don't think you spoke of providing the best for your students. If you look at this building right here, as much money that's been invested in here, you still got dilapidated, old bench and stuff showing. It's money spent in this building, but it's still an old school.
Yes.
You
And I don't think anyone would disagree with you. I mean, you're very,
If you spend 33 million, you still will have an old school.
you're going to have a greatly improved older school.
It's gonna be an
You cannot physically or fiscally afford to build a new school in your community unless someone writes you a check. You can't do it with tax dollars. It cannot be done.
It's gonna be very challenging to float a bond of 33 million to renovate an old school.
And I understand that, and we've worked in communities where those challenges exist. And it is a major effort of people pulling together to do what's in the best interest of kids, and that's why I mentioned it's a political effort. And that's another story to talk about. If the district decides to proceed, how do you go about passing it? And there's plenty of ways that you do that, and it all depends on people voting. That's it. Yes, ma'am.
If you said taxes will, the bond will increase your bill for 1%, right? Which will come up to like $15, $14 a month.
Yes, ma'am.
So that means, is it the city taxes or the county taxes?
Your school district is taxed separately.
Okay,
It's a separate taxes strictly for the school district.
okay, so actually it would be city, not versus county.
I assume the city, applies those taxes.
Yeah, they're meals levied for city purposes, for county purposes, and school district purposes. Those are all three separate taxing jurisdictions. So these meals would be levied on any residents of the school district.
Of the district, and the district is bigger than city limits, I'm assuming.
So is that answering your question? Be separate.
It comes back to that it's gonna be partial Cleveland, Renova, Marigot,
Wherever the limits of the district are.
and more.
In,
That would be the tax base.
Yes, ma'am.
So each person in that area, taxes would go up $180 per year.
Based on the assessment.
that's,
Trust that.
yeah, based on the assessed value. Now, there are other exceptions and things that need to be taken into account. One of them is for individuals who are 65 or older, totally disabled, they're exempt from taxes on the first $75,000 of their house, which would have assessed value of
Right,
$7,500.
right. But the county changed that law last year with the exemption for disabled and able people. So the reason why I'm asking is because, for instance, now we're paying $500 a year for school taxes per property, even if you don't have a child in the school system. So give us something better, like when they consolidated the school, we spent so much money in consolidating the school instead of building a new school. Why we didn't pass the bond issue at that point and just build something new? Because Eastside has been there since my sister's 70 years old.
I know that.
And this school came after Eastside. So why are we still putting band-aids and patches on the school and just build a school?
I-
They had money sitting in Jackson when the schools consolidated to buy the property over there on, Pierman Road where it never did go through. So why are we instead of patching and patching and patching? Let's build something
Yes.
new for our children.
I share your pain. I can't fix the past. I can't fix what Jackson did or did not do. I can only tell you the truth of where you are now. And that's what I'll always do, is tell you the honest truth as best I know it. And I wish you could afford a new school, but you cannot. And I'd rather tell you the truth than sit up here and lie to you and promise you something you can't do. Yes, sir.
I think everybody in this room and everybody in this district fully agrees that these kids need a better place to go to school. This is the only way you're gonna improve their level of education. It's the only way you're gonna give them what they deserve. But to speak to this gentleman's concern, there's a lot of concern about older buildings and being able to fix them. But I have seen older buildings renovated and they look fabulous. My concern is how do you sell basically a $31 million bond project to this community, not this community, this school district, and get a 60% vote unless you do some real marketing and you can show me and him and everybody else that these are going to be buildings that these kids and our families are going to be proud of.
Well, all I can tell you is our past experience, and Jim and I have done many of these together, and I think we're very consistent in our opinion. It is a hard effort on a good day. And it takes a focus on those who vote. And I'm being brutally honest there. There's people that are going to be against your school district no matter what you do. And our experience is you give them data, you give them information, and you be polite and go on about your way. That's just the reality of politics, is that you've got to get people to support what your goals are as a school district. That's mamas and daddies of kids, that's grandparents of kids, and make it about children. And it is a marketing campaign. I wish that it was much simpler than that, but
I guess my question was, are y'all gonna do artist renditions? I would vote for this plan today, but some people have got to see it to believe it.
No, it's a great point, and what we would recommend to the board is when they decide they're ready to proceed, there is a time frame of implementing that process of selling it, marketing, and we would recommend some three-dimensional renderings of what they could look like and what the interior environment would look like. I could show you examples, and Sumner Hill in Clinton is a great example. It was an old 1950s buildings that we did very similar renovations to that radically changed their environment for learning. And it's now a showpiece for that school district. So you have to show people what they're getting. It's got to be real. You can't lie to anybody. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to shed a little light on some of the questions that have been asked, especially by Mr. Jackson. If you all will go back and revisit the judge's decision, Judge Brown, she stated that the east side building was in better condition than the building here that's existing. Ms. Blockett, I'm sorry to tell you, Cleveland Central is almost, is 100 years older than Eastside. Eastside wasn't built until 1957. It opened the fall of 1957. And I'm not trying to, I just want to shed some light on the situation. But I think it's time, and I hear what you all saying, I hear the numbers. It's just time for a new school. To continue to spend this kind of money, I've seen buildings renovated and what they look like and how they operate after total renovation. But to speak from the heart, everyone is not from this community. There are people here that are second, third, and fourth generation families that went to school at Cleveland Central, Cleveland High, and Eastside. And it's a personal thing. No one ever asks, well, how do you all really feel? We know that it comes down to money. More than likely, we will have to have a bond issue. And I think that we should, because it's time. It's not time to keep putting a Band-Aid on Cleveland Central. What did you say, $30 million?
Yeah.
My God, do you all know how much money that is? We can't pay for it in our lifetime. I'm 60 years old myself. But Cleveland Central is almost one of, check the judge's decision. When she came through, she told them. And the people that was with the judge when she came through know this. They already know this. The board knows this. They know what she said. And I feel personally is that enough changes, you all are not involved because you're not from here. There have been enough changes on the east side. Come through Cleveland on a Friday night on the east side and see what it's like. It's nothing. It's dull. We have awesome football games, awesome basketball games, but the facilities need to be upgraded. So if we're going to upgrade anything, let's just do the bond issue and build a new school. There's enough 16 session land here within Cleveland to do that. But surely something we'll have to close. But to take everything, you want to take Naylor Elementary and make it the central office. When the first school that blacks could go to was torn down, Naylor was built. This is history.
That is.
So, you mean we're going to eradicate all of the history on the east side? It's not fair. Why can't you make Pearland or Parks the central office? What would we
Those
tell
are all options.
What would we tell our continue to patch. I don't care what pictures you show. I've visited the Tupelo campus. I've seen they have beautiful schools in DeSoto County. Why are we continuing to throw a Band-Aid on this situation? We may not be able to afford it, but if like me, hey, we can eat a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to get this thing done. I just believe in my heart. It's time for a change, and it's not a tourniquet or, like I said, no Band-Aid for the situation. It's time for a change, something new. And I'm not talking about, okay, this existing building, that's the central office, and you want to take it and make it a field house? Really? We need to change.
I appreciate it.
Maybe there are not enough people from the community here tonight, but trust me, if people will come out into the community and talk to them, they'll find out. They'll let you know how they feel. And I'm just speaking from how I feel, and I'm sure a lot of other people, the people that's here that went to Cleveland High, they probably feel the same way. But yet and still, we're gonna have to make a sacrifice and come up with a different plan for something new. Not the existence of what we have. When just a few years ago, 3 years ago, they were talking about one of the elevators that was supposed to be installed here for the handicapped children. I went to every meeting just about that they had, and all the board talked about what they were going to do. What happened to that money? They raised the taxes then. If I'm not mistaken, someone please check the minutes, check the notes, know what we're dealing with. But again, Ms. Block, go and check. Cleveland Central is 100 years older than the Eastside High School campus. Check the archive is there.
Let me answer a couple of the comments, and I really appreciate your passion. Very, very well said. When the district was looking at having 7th through 12th on the same campus, the Eastside campus would not house those even with an expansion. So that was part of the evaluations that we did, and we did look at that. The district has the option of keeping 7th and 8th grade there. I mean, that is a choice. That's option one. You can keep the organization just as you are and fix every building to the same level. Every building is going to be fixed to the same level in this plan. There will be equity among the schools. And as far as the new school, folks, no, I do not live here, but I'm passionate about this community and passionate about your kids. You cannot afford a new high school. I've been spending 40 years doing this for a living. I'm too old to lie. I just got to tell you the truth. You cannot afford it. And no, this building is not 100 years older than Eastside. No, it's not.
Mr. Gary,
Yes, sir.
let me compliment you on knowing our history, especially when it comes down to this decision years ago. But I want to actually just remind you this, just for my review. You said 33 million, okay, for renovation. Then you said 2 or 3 years later, you spent 8 million on maybe this acquisition unit. 2 or 3 years later, you spent 8 million. That's 16 plus 33. Guess where you are? You close this new school. Is that what you said earlier?
No, I didn't quote the 8 million each year. I mean, every other year. If you went and spent all $33 million on a new school, number one, you would not complete a 9 through 12 school. I can build them as cheap as anybody else can build them. You're not going to get it built. And number two, you would do nothing to the remaining buildings, and they are in a very serious condition. Your mechanical systems, your roof systems, you've got your electrical systems have serious needs. And if you do nothing to those, you're going to keep paying out of your pocket to fix that every year. Look, there's all kinds of organizational systems. You can keep this as a 9th grade school and build a 10 through 12. There's ways of doing things and getting new, but it would abandon everything else in this district. And I can't in good conscience recommend that to you. I'm just telling you the truth. Other questions? Dr. Belcher?
Well, I appreciate everyone coming out. Hopefully, you got some more insight on what can and cannot be done. The plan is to have more meetings, as someone said earlier. Once talk with the board and see what direction we're going to go in, there will be more meetings to give you more information. So be on the lookout. If you want to review this meeting, we recorded it on our YouTube channel online. We have over 100 people online right now watching it. So if you want to go back and review it, you have that option to do so as well. I appreciate you again for coming out, and everybody have a good evening.